James, thank you. Joining us now to discuss this further is House Armed Services Committee Chairman Mac Thornberry. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here. Let's start with the AUMF. As it is now, will this pass?
I don't think so, but our job is to hold hearings and dig down and understand it. I think there's a lot of concern, though, that it is crafted more to thread a political needle rather than to really win and get the job done.
What's the biggest problem with it?
The biggest problem, I think, are the restrictions that it places on what it authorizes. There's all these words: enduring offensive ground combat operations, which cannot be done. And so if you're a troop in the field with all the bullets flying, you got to have your lawyers next to you to figure out, is this offensive or not? Is this enduring or not? Is this ground combat or not? So it ties the hands of our troops, which is what I'm even more concerned about than tying the hands of future presidents.
Well, as we put up the bullet points here, there's a 3-year sunset provision. As you mentioned, it prohibits enduring offensive ground combat operations. It authorizes this force against ISIL or associated persons, and then it takes the place essentially of the 2002 AUMF. It repeals that in Iraq, but leaves the other authorization. You're saying the enduring offensive ground combat operations part is the biggest problem for you.
And how would that work on in the field? And by contrast, if they are going after the al-Nusra front, which is right next door in Syria, then they don't have this restriction. So as somebody said to me, this is really, rather than a brigade of troops going after terrorists, this is more like a brigade of lawyers going after our troops.
Well, let me play devil's advocate. From the Democrats' point of view, there is no appetite to put ground troops in a combat operation in another country in the Middle East. And you look at polls around the country, that's what it says. This doesn't prevent them from using special ops forces on the ground with indigenous forces, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's true. But what it does prevent is offensive versus defensive. That's kind of hard to tell when you're in the middle of a firefight. What is ground combat operations? The White House lawyers admit none of these terms have any precedent. So this is completely new ground that will have to be broken to figure out what is admissible, or what is proper, what is allowed, and what is not. And I worry about putting our troops in that position when they're risking their lives.
When they say it's purposely fuzzy and flexible, do you think the administration will be flexible with how it's phrased as you try to move this across the finish line in Congress?
It's a great question. I mentioned, I think they're trying to thread a political needle. If there are alternative ways to accomplish it, if there are other versions, will they be willing, or are they insisting on their wording? We don't know the answer. But what we're going to do is we're going to have hearings. We're going to talk to lawyers. We're going to talk to military people. We're going to thoroughly dig into all of the issues, including the ones you mentioned, whether there's really a strategy to accomplish any of this or not. And so we'll see what the result of that is.
As U.S. personnel are being moved out of Sana'a in Yemen, you've talked about this a few weeks ago, about the concerns there. Your assessment of what's happening there and the fallout?
Yeah. Bottom line is increased danger to the United States homeland, because over the past several years, the most serious threats to our homeland have come from al-Qaeda in Yemen. And now a substantial amount of our presence is gone. There is less pressure on them. That makes it easier for them to plot and plan against us.
And we don't have an embassy in Sana'a, in Libya, in Somalia, in Syria.
And in each of those places, a hotbed of terrorism that is growing and fermenting, and there's not really a plan to get back. Remember, Yemen was President Obama's success story. It doesn't look good.
Last thing, if you were to bet how long this is going to take to get the AUMF through, what would you say?
I don't know. We've been in combat operations for months before the president ever sent this up. We're going to be deliberate about it, and I think it's going to take a matter of weeks to have some hearings to fully explore it. Then, depending on what we figure out, the votes would come after that.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for the time.
Thanks for having me.